We have been speaking for several weeks now about the realities of death. And we know some simple facts, such as death affects everyone on this planet because sin affected everyone on this planet. So everyone, everywhere, grieves in some way or another. It is a cross-cultural language. No matter where you are, there's death, and people mourn, and people grieve. And often around the time of death, especially during that first week when there are visitations and funerals and such, you have people gathered around grieving together, sometimes openly crying and wailing and such. And we know that this is true thousands of years ago. We read last week about the death of Jacob, and it said in Genesis 49, the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. And that was before they had the funeral out in Canaan. And then the funeral party arrives in Atad beyond the Jordan, and the Bible says they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation. They were wailing, they were upset. And then Joseph made a mourning for his father 7 days. So it went on over 77 days. That's a long time of public mourning. In Jesus' day, it was customary for the Jews to sit Shiva for 30 days. Today, they do it for about a week, but then it was a 30-day time period, which is probably what Mary and Martha were doing when Jesus arrived. That's why Mary stayed in the house, and people were visiting her there. In fact, it was kind of unusual that Martha would come out to see him because people would come to those who were mourning. And in fact, in the commentary on the Gospel of John, Andreas Kistenberger wrote that according to Jewish funeral custom, even a poor family was expected to hire at least 2 flute players and a wailing woman. So that was kind of the deal. If you had someone die, you actually had to hire some musicians, and you paid at least one person to wail loudly. So it could kind of set the tone for the mourning period, you know. Strange custom, but it was true. It's what folks did. We don't see that in the artwork too much. I looked around through some of the famous paintings and such of Jesus and Lazarus. I didn't see any flute players or anyone who looked like they were the paid wailer. But it was a normal tradition back then. We have a lot of customs and traditions around mourning periods, formal periods of mourning. But what always follows the formal period of mourning, no matter what the tradition, the custom, is a period that looks more like this. And this is what most of us go through for weeks or months or maybe years. A feeling where you're more alone, where the grief is your own personal thing to deal with. And so when it comes to mourning, we'd like to know, well, what's normal and what's not normal, if anything. What's helpful in mourning and what's potentially hurtful. What about our own grief? What do we do about the grief that we feel? And how do we help others who are grieving? And those are some of the things that we'd like to talk about tonight. I'd like to just point out, at the end of you should have your little note sheet there. At the bottom, there's a couple of resources. One is this book that came from Thriving, which has a lot of great information. It's called A Time to Mourn, A Time to Dance. And sometimes they send it out for free to Thriving members who have lost someone they love. And it's really a great resource. You might be able to get one from them too if you're not a Thriving member. But the first thing we need to know about grieving is that it is normal, natural, and necessary. Normal, natural, and necessary. Normal that everyone does it. And natural, the same thing. It's just the way we react to things, the way we're wired to react to death in particular. And it's necessary. Some cultures, some families were told to just suck it up, which makes it worse. And we saw that in John chapter 11 that even Jesus grieved. Now his grief was not like the grief of those around him because, first of all, he's God in the flesh. Secondly, he knew the plan all along was to bring Lazarus back to life. Why did he cry? Why was he torn to the heart? Well, 2 things. One was because he hated to see the suffering of God's people. I mean, that's why Jesus came, to relieve our suffering. He came because God hates our suffering. It hurt him to see us suffering so. It hurt him to see us suffering because of death. But another reason why it grieved him to see people in that state is because death is not natural. And this is an important thing, especially in the secular world. You might hear people saying this, even some grief counselors might say, well, death is just a natural part of life. And if someone says that to you, you say, wrong, it was never meant to be part of our lives. We were not created to die. God did not make our bodies to have our souls separated from it. It's a traumatic thing for us to go through and a traumatic thing for us to deal with other people because it is completely against how God ordered nature, against how He created us. Death is not natural. It is a product of sin. Death is not something that God wanted for us. Now, one of the issues with death is that death can bring one to redefine who they are. Meaning, you lose someone who is your spouse, and all of a sudden you go from being a husband or wife to a widow or widower. And you might even ask yourself that, am I no longer a husband or wife? Am I now a widower? Maybe you spend all your time with this person for 50 years. Now you have to redefine yourself as a single person. Perhaps you lost a child and you ask, am I now a parent of 3 instead of a parent of 4? Your whole life changes, and it changes who you are in the context of everything else. And it's a tough thing to deal with. Expressions of mourning can include things like crying, obviously. A lot of people cry. Not everyone does, and it's not a crime if you don't cry. Self-exclusion, meaning people in mourning will sometimes, not always, isolate themselves for a while, hide out, not want to come out and do things, stay at home, avoid visitors, avoid talking on the phone. For the church I went to in New Jersey, had the main door down that way, and out that way was this kind of door that went to the parking lot. And for several weeks or maybe months after my father passed away, when my mother finally felt able to go back to church, she would sneak in that door just before the service started and sneak out before it ended so she wouldn't have to talk to people about it. That's how she dealt with it. That was part of her grieving, self-exclusion. Sometimes it's fear of being alone. You always want people around. You go out to be out of your house because the house is where your child or your parent or your spouse was all the time, and you just don't want to be there by yourself. And so you want to get out. Physical illness, not unusual. Takes a toll on your body, sometimes because of the stress, sometimes because you're not sleeping well, sometimes because you're not eating right, sometimes because all of it together. Not unusual. Forgetfulness, common expression of mourning. Again, partly because of the stress, all of the things on your mind. Also, disorientation comes with that. Kind of losing your bearings. Why was I getting in the car? Where was I going just now? Not really sure. Something was so simple. I used to operate the can opener, and you're looking at it going, how does that work again? Oh, that's right. And sometimes even spiritual crisis. Sometimes it affects your faith. Sometimes you're angry with God. Sometimes you're struggling because in your brain you're going, I know where my loved one is, but in your heart you're miserable. And you're having a hard time reconciling the two. If I know that my loved one is with Christ in heaven, why do I feel this way? It's a spiritual crisis, right? But the fact is, it's normal to feel that way. There's also something that I often call the phantom limb syndrome. Have you ever known someone who had a limb amputated, an arm or a leg, and sometimes you've heard them say how it often feels like it's still there. There's a sensation as if it's still there. And then you have to remind yourself, oh, yeah, it's not there. And I've seen that often when people pass away. It feels like they're still there, and you do crazy things, and you go, oh, that's right. They're not there anymore. And you it go on for months or years where you have to keep reminding yourself, oh, that's right, they're just not there anymore. It's normal. That is a normal thing to experience. Knowing all these things, knowing that all of this is absolutely normal, then the next thing to remember is that you have to give yourself permission to grieve. There was a film that I'd seen with Robert De Niro years ago that had two names. One was the Great Santini, and I think it was the Ace. And he was a high-ranking guy, and I think it was the Air Force. And when his wife died, he gave his children like an hour to grieve. That was it. And then we're done. That was their permission. But you have to give yourself permission to grieve. You have to tell yourself, I'm going to do this, I have to do this, I'm doing it. And that's it. And not limit yourself and say, I can't do this, which is what some folks like to do. And in fact, folks get so carried away with this idea that this isn't normal, I shouldn't be doing this, that there's a few phrases that I hear quite often. One is, am I going crazy? Or the other is, am I losing my mind? And the truth is, you are not going crazy or losing your mind. But it is such a common thing to feel and say this, that every book I read said this in there. Every book said the same thing about this. You are not going crazy, and you are not losing your mind. This is a normal reaction to death, and to you dealing with something that you shouldn't have to deal with. Also, you cannot set unrealistic expectations for yourself or others. You cannot say, okay, you know what, I'll probably feel like this for 3 months and then I'll be good. You know, like when you had surgery? All right, 6 weeks and I'm back at work. Right? Seems like no matter what kind of surgery you have, it's always 6 weeks is a magic number. You can't do that when you're grieving. You can't say, okay, 6 weeks, well, now it's over. And then when you still feel crummy after 6 weeks, now you're getting angry at yourself, going, well, I should be better by now. Or, worse, doing it to other people. And it happens more often than you think. Geez, aren't you over this yet? It's been a year. Tell you what, I'm going to kick you really hard in the shin. And then 10 minutes from now, I'm going to go, doesn't it feel better yet? You can't time that thing. That's crazy. You can't set expectations for yourself or anybody else. And partly, too, because everybody's different. Everybody is going to react differently. So you can't, well, I felt fine after 4 weeks. I don't know what his problem is. It doesn't work that way. Consequently, there is no time limit or schedule for your grief. Do not set time limits for yourself. Do not expect anybody else to follow through. First of all, it's impossible, and secondly, it's just selfish. It's horrible to do that. I think somebody should be over something in a certain amount of time. There's a lot of factors. I remember I was a young guy. I don't even know I was in my 20s yet. Maybe I was still a teenager. And my neighbor died next door, Mrs. Lee. And her and Mr. Lee had been married for, I think, like maybe 50 years, give or take. And I realized, wow, these people have known each other more than twice as long as I've been alive. I couldn't fathom that. I couldn't figure out what it'd be like to know somebody for that long. I didn't know myself for that long. You know, when you've known someone 50, 60 years, it's a lot different than knowing somebody 10 years, right? So it's going to affect you differently. Now, however, knowing all this, knowing that it's going to hit us all deeply, that we're going to feel awful for a long period of time, that we're going to have ups and downs, and there's no schedule for the ups and downs either. You might go weeks feeling really great, and then all of a sudden something triggers, and you feel crummy again for a month. Even though all of this is true, we do not grieve as those who have no faith. That does not mean that we're not allowed to grieve or feel horrible. Some people say that. I'm a Christian. I shouldn't feel this way. There's no such rule. Jesus cried. There's no such rule. But we have a different perspective on it because of our faith in Jesus Christ. And Paul wrote about that in the letter we read earlier. And he tells us, we don't want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep or who have died, that you may not grieve as others who have no hope. It doesn't say that you won't grieve. They don't have hope, they'll grieve, you won't. He doesn't say that. You won't grieve the same way as those who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. So we're looking forward to what? the resurrection, right? This is important. We talked about this a little bit the first week. We're going to talk more about this next week. We are always thinking about physical resurrection. We will see this person again. That's the one mistake we make as Christians sometimes, this feeling of, I'll never see them again. Not true. Or I'll see them again, but they won't look the same. Well, they might look different to some degree, but they will have a physical body of some sort, because that's the promise of the resurrection. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be a resurrection. If it was a bodiless resurrection, you wouldn't call it a resurrection. So we look forward to this because we know Jesus died and himself was resurrected and has promised when he returns to bring all those to life. And then he describes the second coming of Jesus as, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. We've got the whole scenario. We know what it's going to look like. And so even though we grieve and we're miserable and we don't know how to deal with these feelings, and we can't suppress them, we can't make them go away, we can look forward to something that nobody else can. And that's how we don't grieve like others who have no hope. We can look forward and we can dwell on this. Sometimes when we're grieving, we want to dwell in the past, but as Christians, we have the benefit of being able to dwell in the future. Imagine the future. Fantasize about the future. It's okay, because we have a future, and the future is guaranteed. And that's what transforms our grieving. Now, when you are dealing with grief and mourning of your own, there are several steps you can take. One is to avoid denial, or you can own the experience. You know, grasp the fact, yes, this person is gone, they died. And say, I apprehend that in my head, and I'm going to grasp it in my heart, and I'm going to fully take this on, and it's going to be my grieving. I'm going to deal with it this way. Secondly is to express your feelings. You can talk with someone. You can journal. You can write a blog. You can do whatever you want to express how you're feeling. Usually a combination is good. Sometimes you feel like talking to somebody else. Sometimes you just feel like writing down how you're feeling at the moment. Maybe you'll write a song. Maybe you'll yell in the air at God. Whatever you do, express your feelings. It's fine. Experience the pain. Why do we say that? Because we want to avoid pain. This is an ongoing thing about suffering, right? Our whole life is trying to avoid suffering. And we don't want it, so we try to compartmentalize the pain and just ignore the whole thing. But specialists say it's better to just actually go with the flow. Allow the pain to hit you so you can deal with it. And you will either conquer it or you will become accustomed to it so that doesn't bother you anymore. But experience the pain. Find coping mechanisms that work for you. You know what? I'm going to go to the driving range and smack 1,000 balls until I feel a little better. You know? Maybe that's what works for you. For other people, maybe they like to go for walks. There's a lot of different things you could do. Sometimes a coping mechanism, and this is true of any kind of coping mechanism, sometimes a coping mechanism is simply avoiding some things that you know are going to upset you. It's okay. You know, we always went to that particular hot dog stand every Friday night. You know what? I'm not going to go to the hot dog stand for a while. Some people might think it's more like falling off the bicycle. I'm going to go back there and I'm going to conquer it. Other people go, you know what? I'm better off staying away from there. And that's okay. Either one's an appropriate coping mechanism. It's a way of helping you to deal with the situation. Another good one is, where did I leave off? Oh, and learn how to live with your new normal. That doesn't mean deal with it. That doesn't mean, no, you got to live with it. It means learn how to live with the new normal. It means it takes some effort sometimes, saying, okay, this is my life now. How can I make this work? Because, you know, the thing we have to remember always is when God takes someone from us and we are still here, He's kept us here for a reason. He still has plans for us. He still has a life for us. We don't know how many years it's going to be. My grandmother lived, I think, about 35 years after my grandfather passed away. Maybe a little longer. And if she just rolled over and said, oh, well, that's it, man, that would have been a horrible 35 years or so. But we do have a new life. It's a new normal. It's not one we might enjoy, but it is the new normal, and you can be in denial of it, or you can say, okay, I'm going to figure out how this works. And it could take a lot of work, but it's something that we do as part of our grief process. Now, some practical suggestions. One is maintain a daily routine. Experts mention this all the time. If you're employed at the time, don't go back to work necessarily the next day, but don't take 3 months off either. Why? Not because you're going, well, I've grieved enough, I'm going back to normal routine. It's because these are things that occupy your mind and your person in ways that help you to adjust to the new normal, right? And sometimes it's things that you were doing anyway that it helps you to deal with that. So if you got things that you typically did, or you can add new things to your routine, do that. And just stick to these things. And it will help you physically and mentally and spiritually to stick with a routine, whatever that is. Use faith resources, which could mean just talking to the pastor. It could mean devotions, going to Bible classes. Coming to church is a faith resource. Most people, shortly after a loved one dies, want to be right back in church again to feel that reassurance. Some people want to avoid it for a while. And, you're missing, I think, a lot of valuable time with God when you do that. Again, sometimes it can be stressful to go do that, so you might need to take some time off. But you're missing out on what God wants to give you when you do that. So utilize your faith resources. Confide in someone. Now, that could be a personal friend that you want to talk to, or it could be joining a group like a grief share group where you can get together with others who are in the same mindset and can talk about these things. And that's good because they're all often receptive to that. They know what you're going through and they're willing to listen. Here's a good one. Release your anger constructively. Do not kick the dog, but if you have a punching bag, hit that. You want to hit a pillow? Fine. You want to dig in the dirt outside? That's good. Because quite often there is anger. Not always, but sometimes there's a certain anger. Sometimes we're angry at the person that died, right? I've seen that a lot. And it could be because they didn't go to the doctor enough, or simply just because you feel like, how did they abandon me like that? And so you feel this anger. And you can bottle it up or you get rid of it. But do it constructively, in a healthy way, not in a way that harms yourself or somebody else. Also, exercise. That's great. Any kind of work in your body is always good. It always makes you feel a little bit better. So I've heard. One day I'm going to find out for sure. Soon, I hope. And avoid chemicals. I don't mean like bleach cleaners, I mean like drugs and alcohol and such, because sometimes this becomes our way of coping. It's not a good coping mechanism. Not a good way of dealing with things. Now, with all this in mind, knowing that we're going to go through a lot of ups and downs, we're going to have some strange reaction things. Sometimes we'll get angry easily. Sometimes we will become upset and cry easily. Sometimes we want to hide out. All of these things, which are normal, we need to keep in mind that there is a difference between typical grieving and clinical depression or other psychological afflictions. Because sometimes grief can turn into something else, and something else that is crippling or damaging to yourself or to others. Possible symptoms you might see probably in someone else, because if you're feeling this way, you might not see it yourself. Feeling isolated, either emotionally or physically. Feeling like you're all alone on the planet. Even in a crowd in the street in New York City, you feel like you're all alone. That might happen for a little while after a death, but if it's going on for months and years, that's something to worry about. Flashbacks or recurrent nightmares could be a problem. A preoccupation with your loss many months or years after it occurred. In other words, this is the thing that's going on in your head all day long, all day long, all day long. And it controls decisions you make and plans you make. Then there's something you should consider seeing a professional about. Disinterest in life in general. And, I've seen that personally in my family. Oh, I don't really care what happens to me anymore, right? That's not necessarily grieving. That's kind of going a step beyond. Wishing to die and join your loved one. Violent outbursts or a dependence on alcohol or drugs. These are things that have gone beyond normal grieving and means you should probably get some kind of special help. And don't be afraid of special help because it's always good. There's nothing to be ashamed with that. There are great Christian counselors who can help with that. Right in our area we have some great Christian counselors. Now sometimes we have a challenge of dealing with children who are grieving, especially if a parent or grandparent died or something. And what often happens is we get so tied up in our own grieving we kind of forget about the kids. Or we assume that they're feeling a certain way, or we assume that they're not affected by it. And they have no support. And so my advice dealing with children, first of all, is to speak frankly with them about death before it ever occurs. And then speak frankly again about it when somebody dies, because sometimes I've seen folks who either try to make it nice, kind of like when I went to have my tonsils taken out. I was going to have surgery, and it wasn't going to feel good, And instead of somebody saying to me, son, you're going to the hospital, and you're going to have surgery, and they're going to cut something out of your throat, and it's going to hurt, and we're going to try to make it better. They said, oh, we're going to take you for a nice ride on this gurney. Isn't that fun? And when you get back, you'll have all the ice cream and Jell-O you want. I would have much rather have been told the truth up front, because then I know what I'm going through and how to deal with it. I didn't care about ice cream and sherbet afterward, man. My throat hurt. And I punished my parents by not speaking anything for like a week. And they deserved it. They should have told me the truth. And death isn't too much different. Kids aren't dumb. Kids grasp a lot of things. And what we have the blessing of is being able to talk about it within the context of our faith before it ever happens. Somebody's going to die, or the pet might die or something, and this is what happens. But it's okay, because God is with us through all of this. And if it's a relative, God, they're going to be with God. And you're going to be with God. And I've seen children who are well prepared go into a wake or a funeral and deal with it pretty well. And I've seen other children go and just falling apart because they didn't know how to deal with it. Even if they're preschoolers, you can speak in ways that they will understand about it. When someone close dies, encourage them to participate to the extent that they feel comfortable. My grandfather passed away for some reason. I think I was 7 years old. My parents had this idea it was better to send me off somewhere for a week. So I went to my cousin's house. And even at the age of 7, I felt like I was ripped off. I didn't get that closure I wanted, Looking back, I wish I could have gone, even though it's kind of boring, But nowadays, the funeral home in New Jersey we go to, they have a playroom in the basement. They let the kids go hang out in anyway. So it wasn't so boring sitting there for hours on end. But I wish I could have done it. And so it has to do with your relationship with your children. Talk to the children or the grandchildren and see what they're comfortable doing. If they'd rather go to their cousin's house for a week, let them go. If they want to come and participate, let them do it. If they want to go up to the casket and touch their relative, let them do it. It's okay. But overall, the main thing is expect behavioral changes in children who are grieving and help them to cope with their feelings. And this is interesting because some children will react immediately. And when I say behavioral changes, I don't mean like they act badly. It just means they might be upset, they might be withdrawn, all kinds of things could happen. Other kids don't seem to mind at all. Or don't seem to mind at all at that time, but 2 months down the road it hits them. I've seen families lost somebody, 2 children close in age, and 2 different reactions. One was devastated, the other one seemed, life goes on. And I had to warn them, just keep an eye, because 2 days from now, 2 months from now, all of a sudden you can see behaviors coming out. Sometimes it's things like not doing well in school anymore, or having bathroom issues, or all sorts of things. But expect it. which means when it happens, don't get angry and chew them out. Say, oh, this is probably what happens, and we're going to work with it. We're going to help them. You know, it's a cool thing that I like to do is I found a bunch of books that are really good, and I keep them in my office. And you can find some yourself in a bookstore online, or you can borrow these if you have to deal with a death. This one's called What Happened When Grandma Died. Grandpa is there in heaven. Heaven is a wonderful place. And so, not as it is a nice story, but it's a way to connect with kids' feelings, because something in the book might trigger their own feelings and thoughts, and it gives you a way to talk to them, which is what you're looking for. How to connect with a feeling that they can't express, and then all of a sudden they'll go, oh yeah, I felt that way, right? So those are great resources, getting storybooks like that. Helping other folks who are grieving when you're not the one going through it, and you know other people that are suffering. That's a challenge in itself. There's several practical suggestions for helping others. The first one is to be patient. Patient in the 3 hours it might take for someone to tell you their story, or patient in the 3 years it might take for them to start feeling better. Be patient in general. The next one is to listen. This is a challenge for all of us, even me quite often. It's shut up and let them talk. Simple rule. Sometimes they don't feel like talking. And this is a big thing, is sometimes we don't know what to do or say, and we think we should know something clever to say, pastors especially. We've discussed as many pastors, and we think we show up somewhere and we should know just the right thing to say. And you know what? The truth is, quite often there's nothing to say. And most of the time, people are just happy to have you around. And on top of that, what I've learned from experience is, if I did have something clever and brilliant to say, nobody remembered it anyway. When you are deeply distressed, rarely do you really process what people are saying, you know. Your heart's all over the place. And so, don't kill yourself trying to think of something great to say. Just be there. And that's the next one, actually, is be available. Being available doesn't mean sitting by the phone, but be around for the person. And often you're not doing too much of anything. It's just being around them. Think about a common thing that happens when someone dies, especially up north, where there's more that immediate culture, where things happen quickly. You have the death occurs within 2-3 days. Every relative in the world shows up. Maybe some friends from out of town come. You have visitations. You have the funeral. You have a bunch of meals together, and then people trickle out, and then all of a sudden, you're by yourself. And that's when it hits you. Having the people around is a comfort, you know. Even having little kids around. As crazy as they get, little kids running around being little kids is a great distraction when you're dealing with grief. Because that's like your one connection to normality. Them doing what they always do. Because everybody else is all, you know, and the kids are doing their thing. And that's great because it grounds you back in reality. I remember when I was an elder at my home church, we would all always go to the same place, as I said last week, Van Vanderplaat's funeral home in Fairlawn. Somebody passed away. And every time I walked in, the guy opened the door. Welcome. You know, Lurch was his name, I think. You know, and everybody who worked there, they all looked the same. At the funeral, they all looked the same. I'm like, guys, they're sad already. Why are you helping? Smile. And there was one guy who was a member of our church who worked at the funeral home, and he did smile. And he said, hey, it's good to see you. And I said, thank you for smiling. For goodness sake. You know, these guys depressed me. You don't need more of that. You don't come around to be available to be depressing. You want to be there as a support. Offer specific help. You know what we mean by this is the common thing for everybody to say, and it's okay to say this, but we don't think about it when we say it. If there's anything I can do, give me a call. Because you know as well as I do, if anybody says that to you, do you call? Nah, I don't want to bother anyone. You know, it's just just the way it is. Specific help. Call up and say, hey, can I get you, bring you some food? Hey, can I come by for a little while? Hey, and maybe you worry about being a nag. And maybe some people want to be just left alone, but you know what? Too bad. Offer specific help. If they say no, they say no. It's okay. But you can't worry about it, because the flip side is people are left just to stay in that little pit, and that's not a good thing. Don't give advice about grieving. If I were you, advice, sometimes it can be helpful, but often, again, we need to do it in our own way, in our own time. If somebody asks your opinion, what do you think about this? Be careful about that too. What do you think? Don't you think I should be over this by now? Do not go there. Well, yeah, because it's not going to feel any better, I'm telling you. It's not going to make anybody feel any better. It's just make them feel worse. Even though you think that's the answer they're fishing for, it won't help. Here's an idea. Use the Bible. Like we're reading Psalms because they connect with feelings. It's good. And you might think, I better read just upbeat stuff. No, even like Psalm 38, which is kind of down, it's something you relate to, right? Think about the music you used to listen to, especially when you were young, right? Teenager, certain times you listen to real upbeat stuff, and other times when your girlfriend dumped you, you played all this really sad, depressing stuff. The music wasn't depressing you. It was connecting with the feelings you had at the time. And it's the same with things we read in the Bible. The things will connect with your feelings, and it's okay. And also, don't make judgments. I can't believe he's still doing this at this point. Don't do that. I can't believe she sleeps with her husband's picture on the pillow. And I've had relatives do that. People do it their own way. Don't make judgments. This is the page right out of this book. This is some good stuff here, which, boy, it'd be great if I could read it. Hold on a second. Some do's and don'ts. I really like this. Don't force the mourner into a role by saying, you're doing so well. Allow the mourner to have troubling feelings without the sense of letting you down. Second, don't tell the mourner what he or she should do. At best, this reinforces the mourner's sense of incompetence, and at worst, your advice can be off target completely. Don't say, call me if you need anything. We already said that one. Don't delegate helping to others. Your personal presence and concern will make a difference. Don't say, I know how you feel. Each griever's experience of grief is unique, so invite the mourner to share his or her feelings rather than presuming that you know what the issues are for that person. Don't use hackneyed consolation by saying, there are other fish in the sea, or God works in mysterious ways. This only convinces the mourner that you don't care enough to understand. Same happens when your child's boyfriend or girlfriend dumps them. Don't say, there are other fish in the sea, it was meant to be, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't help at all. Maybe you've heard it yourself, said to you, and it didn't help you, did it? Don't try to hurry people through grief by reminding them how long it's been, or by urging them to get busy, give away the deceased possessions, etc. Grief works in different ways and takes time and patience, cannot be done on a fixed schedule. That's an interesting thing right there, because some folks, Kim's mother died, and like 2 days later, her dad was trying to get all the clothes out of the house. My dad died. Those clothes are still there. My dad's clothes, except for a few things, are still in that house. She didn't want a thing touched. Which is the correct answer? Neither one. Whichever works for you. So do not go to people and say, aren't you going to get rid of this stuff? We don't have to do that. On the other hand, do open the door to communication. If you aren't sure what to say, ask, how are you feeling today? Or say, I've been thinking about you. Do listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. Do offer specific help. Do be there for the mourner. Do talk about your own losses and how you adapted to them. Although the mourner's coping style may be different than your own, your self-disclosure will help. Do use appropriate physical contact, like an arm around the shoulder or a hug when words fail. Learn to be comfortable with shared silence rather than chattering away in an attempt to cheer the person up. Do be patient with the griever's story and allow him or her to share memories of the lost one. This fosters a healthy continuity as the person orients to a changed future. Do use the name of the deceased. This person played an important part in the mourner's life. It is important to recognize that by mentioning the person by name. And do speak comfort from God's word. So those are some great ideas. However, with all that said, you do also want to watch for warning signs of deeper problems. Things such as they're not eating. They haven't taken a bath in a week. The clothes they're wearing are dirty. They've been the same clothes for 4 or 5 days in a row. They don't ever leave the house. Trash accumulating in the house. Things that are just really unhealthy and really, really out of line. Because then they probably need some extra help. And the truth is they might need like an intervention. Like you would do with someone who's hooked on drugs or alcohol or something. They need to bring somebody in who can help them because they are in self-destruct mode at that point. There's a degree to which we can say, yes, I'm miserable, I'm suffering, yes, but folks become almost either unable to function or suicidal. And that's not good for anybody. And we don't allow that to happen. We have to help folks who are in that situation. Also, reach out to grieving people during the year of firsts. I mean, like the first anniversary after the death, the first birthday, the first Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, because those are almost always tough times for folks. Just this past Saturday was my father's birthday. He died 2 years ago. And this is a weird way of, I call it the phantom limb syndrome. I looked at the calendar and said, oh, it's my dad's birthday. I should probably call my mom because she's going to be feeling really down today about that. And then I said, oh, that's right, Mom died. It was this kind of connection. There's an automatic connection you have to stuff, and you still kind of adjust to it over time. I think about my experience with 9/11. The first anniversary was a big deal. Big deal. I was still working in the neighborhood. I did certain things on that day that I didn't do again after that. Each year it was a little less and less, and after a few years I just don't even get involved anymore. That's my way of it's like a type of grieving. That's how I adjusted to it. The first year was the worst, and then each year after that got a little different. Does that mean it's time for me to stop preaching? Did I hit the? Oh dear, it is. It's like time to go. Okay. Well, I'll wrap it up then. Thank you. Your subtlety is always appreciated. Speaking of which, be prepared to hear people say, quote, stupid things. Why? Not because they're mean or ignorant. Sometimes people are a little clueless about stuff, but most of the time we don't know what to do. We want to do something. We want to help. We want to fix it. We don't know what to do. So what do? We just say what comes to mind, and it comes out kind of stupid. So not only are you prepared to hear people say stupid things, but be prepared for yourself to say something stupid, because it's going to happen, and just don't kick yourself about it too much. But remember, whether you're the one grieving or you're the one helping somebody else who's grieving, that you are not alone. Remember in 1 Thessalonians, Paul said, we will always be with the Lord. And in Matthew 28, he said, I am with you always to the end of the age, which means this is a continuity. From the moment that you died, you're still with God. He's with you now. He's with you when you go to heaven. He's with you when he resurrects you. He's with us here while we're grieving. Just in the same way, it crushed his spirit to see the people grieving over Lazarus. It crushes his spirit to see us grieving and suffering. And so he comforts us with his spirit. He comforts us by sending others who are also there to help us in his name. And it is in the name of Jesus that we all say, Amen.